Think forward. Think Research Channel.
Well, you know, seeing is believing, right? And the Center for Visualization is really aimed at giving us a new way of seeing, a new way of interpreting what we see, of thinking about what we see, and that's critically important. New ways of seeing have driven science in the past, and I think new ways of seeing will help us drive new science and new ways of thinking about our world.
An artwork essentially is like a piece of cake.
There's many ways and many levels to the art world.
The real here is a slippery term.
Surveillance has almost always been a part of my work.
So the big brother's watching you.
That piece really came from my guts.
What I try to do is present this whole East-West dichotomy.
It's always a constant reminder that you don't need so much to tell something with real power. I'm Professor Doreen Maloney. I'm a professor of new media in the College of Fine Arts and also a member of the Center for Visualization and Virtual Environments here at the University of Kentucky. I first became involved with the Center for Visualization and Virtual Environments through a collaboration that was put together with Dr. Joe Fink of the Aztec Center with Dr. Brent Seals and Dr. Chris Janes. I had introduced myself to Dr. Fink and as a new artist on campus that was interested in media, and that I was really open to collaboration and was hoping to work with scientists. About 6 months later, he called me and said, I have two people I think you should meet. I think there's a natural collaboration going to happen here. So I met with Dr. Seals and Dr. Janes, and we started working before there was even a Center for Visualization and Virtual Environments. I worked with a new colleague, Dmitry Strakovsky. I think he's a wonderful asset. We're very lucky to have him. And also, I thought he would be a great complement and a bridge between myself, who I do more aesthetic research here at the center, with somebody who actually can do more programming. He speaks the same language, or he speaks more of the language of the programmers here at the Viz Center, yet at the same time still does aesthetic objects as the output.
My name is Dmitry Strakovsky, and I usually go by Dima. That's a lot easier. And I am an assistant professor in the Department of Art, College of Fine Arts at the University of Kentucky, and I'm one of the affiliated faculty with the Center for Visualization. With the Visualization Center, there is this great opportunity for individuals from all sorts of disciplines to work with computer scientists on the issues that would, on the issues essentially where there's an overlap. For example, with fine arts, there's definite overlap in this visual sector where how do you organize visual information, what is the meaning of that organization, right? And then perhaps some of the purely aesthetic and interface design issues really do come into play there. So some of the work that I've generated this year, for example, has been for the projects that were led by the scientists from the center.
Well, the best way to maybe talk about research is with the example behind me, which is conversations.
And all kinds of people wrote gospels.
And they picked and chose.
Set up 8 cameras, 3 on 2 characters and 2 on another, to get their eye, their face, and their body, and then recorded them as a performance. I made them interact with newspapers that were stacked around them, put them in this environment, mic'd it. They were surrounded by cameras, and after about an hour of just talking about what was in the news, I would edit sections from that. And I produced this, and I wanted the public to see this, that surveillance could actually be somewhat harmful. I failed in the project. It took a year and a half to do that. It was all synced by hand. It took about 1 month to actually film. What happens is, in the current climate of reality television, and this is what I would say is research related, the actual result was that in our current climate of reality TV, that people just love to see real people talking about really anything. And that it was just such great entertainment. They couldn't care less what they were saying, except that they wanted to laugh. And that it was so great that I had people asking me to be in the next edition, that they wanted to subject themselves to being maybe somewhat celebrities in this thing. So it was really, for me, how the culture of reality TV and the constant surveillance, instead of making people more paranoid about it, it's actually more welcomed. That we don't care about the surveillance. In fact, we just want to be in the spotlight.
The way I would look at an artwork is not necessarily as research in and of itself. Okay, things that I do to create artwork often involve quite a bit of research. This would be historical and factual research. This would be reading certain philosophical or sometimes scientific texts that would give me a little bit more of an insight into the concepts that I'm dealing with. Also would involve quite a bit of technical research, pretty much learning new computer languages just to accomplish a certain task. Essentially, the practice sort of culminates in a work of art. For example, the Visualization Center created the world's highest resolution monitor. Okay, so this is an array of projectors, and I've basically created a work that would take advantage of this super high resolution wall, and then from that work I actually created another series of works that were print-based, but still had some of the same ideas and related to it conceptually very much.
My educational background is very varied. I have degrees in Russian and German, a master's in Turkish history, as well as an undergraduate degree in dance, which was actually an inter-arts and technology degree. This degree, inter-arts and technology, was a combination of dance and video, or dance for the camera. And then I went on with an MFA in video art. Now you would say, well, how would somebody from a linguistic and history background actually end up in the arts? But in contemporary art, a lot of art is identity-driven, idea-driven, and very theoretical. And video art tends to deal with identity and contemporary art and contemporary theory. Well, I studied contemporary theory in my history degrees, and so they sort of envelope very nicely.
I would say I have kind of a wider idea of education in some sense, maybe both formal and what one would say informal education. So, for example, the classes that I've taken at Illinois Wesleyan, classes that I've taken at Illinois State University, and then following that, classes that I've taken like in Japan, at the Art Institute, were incredibly helpful for generating certain skills. But also, I would say Chicago especially has been this incredible informal education. Like, for example, going out when I was there, the music scene was pretty incredible. So I could learn a lot from the musicians that were playing, and I had access to these world-class musicians who would be playing in the bars right around me, right? And then going to galleries and checking out what people are doing. So essentially, this informal aspects, being a part of an art scene, being a part of a music scene, really has influenced me almost as much as the specific classes that I've taken in the education system. Also, I would say one of the most incredible experiences of, say, especially graduate education, is the fact that you're surrounded by your peers who are very much interested in the same things that you are, and are kind of in the same place in their artistic development or quote-unquote careers as you are. So you end up learning a lot from them, because you can see if someone is very driven right next to you and the work that they produce. Obviously, your own work starts getting better and better. So that's incredibly instructive. I began actually working in digital media as a designer. So that was my student employment opportunity. So essentially I worked for an office on campus that dealt with all sorts of new technologies. The web was coming out. This was '94 when I started working. So '94, '95 is when all the major browsers were hitting the street. And everyone wanted, all the departments on campus and some of the professors wanted websites. So they decided that they should go somewhere, and there should be some sort of repository of knowledge about this kind of stuff. Since no one really knew what they were doing back when the web was first starting up, I kind of just hired a whole bunch of students, and I was one of the lucky ones. Got hired. I was an art major at the time, so Photoshop, Painter, early versions of Flash, things like that were very much kind of up my alley, and all sorts of visual programs were really something I was interested in learning. Got fairly up to speed fairly fast using these programs, but then at the same time I was like I said, an art major. I was doing painting. So what happened is that there was almost this disconnect where my job on campus was working with technology and working with various, it's like web incarnations of it. And then I would go in my studio and start painting. And at a certain point I decided, hey, it's like the two technologies that I was using, one painting and the other one computer-based, were things that really can be put together. And I started experimenting with that. And that's essentially was my start in digital media. So really kind of commercially driven start, but I tried to incorporate all the techniques that I was learning from the commercial software into more of a fine arts context.
I thought to myself, what is the thing I really have always loved, and that has been dance. That's such a passion. I said, before I get out of this university, I am going to go over to that dance department. I'm going to convince them to let me into a composition class, even though I have no dance background, and I want to make dances. And Professor Li Xiaoping, who's an international renowned dancer, I was in her class, she let me in. And she's fierce as well. And after 3 times of her saying to me that I needed to be a dancer at 30 years old, that I had somehow missed my path, and this was obviously where I belonged in the dance world, she convinced me to go back for another undergraduate degree in dance. And I did that. I loved it. I took composition. I was 30 in classes with people who were 19 doing this incredibly difficult movement, and I did hurt myself. And I just physically could not manage the dance. And they said, well, there's this video component. Oh, I don't want to do video. I hate video. I hate TV. I don't watch TV. Why would I like this? I said, no, it's making dances for the camera. And I started, and I loved it. I received grants I hadn't even applied for. I was given honors. I was juried into shows, and it just seemed like I'd always been a good student. I'd always done well. But this was just easy. It was like things were just happening. So I just decided, I'm going to go with this. And now I'm a professor of it, and it's just really odd how it happened. Should art have meaning? Stuff that seems to work more in a local or craft-based market can can have meaning, but it can also just function, I think, on a more of a pure aesthetic level. Stuff that goes to a more national or international market needs to have meaning to actually make it into those markets. So these are choices and strategies that artists need to understand. It's not that we just go into a room and just create sort of vacuously our emotions. That is a stereotype, and it's really not the way artists work. Some do, but there's a specific type of artist that works that way. And someone was just telling me earlier this week, oh, art, it's just all the same, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I'm like, it's a $4 billion industry.
An artwork essentially is like a piece of cake. So with the cake you get these top layers, the icing. The icing is what's going to draw people in visually. The icing is what's going to tell people, it's like, I want to eat this. Okay, this is great. Okay, but you don't want to have a cake made just out of icing, right? Everyone is going to be going like, oh, that's too sweet. There's not enough variety here. You need these other layers. And essentially, I am a conceptual artist. Most of my work is conceptually driven. So these layers are there. These layers of meaning are there. But what I choose to do is to have this icing layer also, to bring people in. And it's really, it's essentially a way to start a conversation with a viewer. It's not to sugarcoat any sort of, just to kind of work with this metaphor, it's not to sugarcoat any of the ideas, but essentially make them either, the first step to the idea accessible enough, okay? Or extend a hand to the person, or start a conversation, have some sort of an in that's available for the viewer into the work. And then allow them this time with the work to deal with possible interpretations, to deal with possible ideas. So the work has to function on these kind of two levels, where it has this exhibition value where you're drawing in the viewer, but it also has this conceptual value underneath. And I feel that when my work has been at its most successful, or when the work of other artists has been its most successful, it's really had that, I wouldn't say wider appeal, you could say almost this wider appeal or accessibility factor, okay? But it also had this incredible depth in it.
And these are like meditations. Along with that is another piece that is just peaches that I have, when they're projected, they're sort of life size, 5 foot, 6 foot in size, and I shoot them with a shotgun. They're hanging in trees, and I shoot them. It's a series of 6 of them, and then I slow down in slow motion these peaches being just blown to bits and blown apart, which looks a lot like flesh. Just to give people an idea of what it is to be shot. I think we see these movies, and it always is so cleanly edited, but when bodies blow apart, it's trauma, it's horrifying. And so with the peach, rather than a human body, I looked at that. That piece was done, I think, in response to my cousin who died in the World Trade Center in New York City. He was on the 104th floor of one of the buildings, and he died. He was blown up and blown to bits. And the only way I could really reconcile what happened there was to shoot a peach and see, literally with my camera, how fast the transition was from being a whole being to just nothing. And the transition was faster than my camera could even capture. And in some ways that gave me some sort of peace. I mean, maybe again, it's an imagined piece that whatever happened to him hopefully happened so fast that he felt nothing. The other 2 pieces that go along with that, in that war suite, called Resonance. There's a piece that I made called 319, A View from My Porch. And I had my surveillance tapes up. I said, you know what, I'm going to surveil the whole war, I did stop, from my vantage point of my porch. And I put the camera out of my window, and I said, I am going to just do this as a reminder to myself that every day that we are bombing this other country, that people are dying, so that when I'm out in my yard planting tulips and, smiling at the blue sky, that there's an awareness that things are not like this everywhere. I distilled the first 24-hour strike on Baghdad down to 3 minutes. I call it 319, A View from My Porch. And by condensing it, the car lights going by look like machine gun fire. and the sun coming up and going down looked like a missile launch. But the piece is very, very provocative. I use sounds from the actual launch, from that you could download everything. Again, there was such a euphoria that they were putting the sounds of the war on websites. You could go to abcnews.com or CNN and just download, oh, sound of missile launch on Baghdad. Yeah, sure, I'll save that, and a few other sounds. And I actually used those as the accompanying soundtrack. And what you get is what war would look like from the Kentucky's viewpoint. I think, again, with the TV and that interface, weak movie to us. To sort of mitigate that, I made a piece that, again, involves no bloodshed. It's just a suburban neighborhood, but the sounds and the way it's edited, it really puts you, it makes you aware of war.
Well, Insecurity Camera was a joint project. This was a three-person collaboration, Ben Chang, Sylvia Rozanka, and myself. And essentially what we tried to do was to have this humorous, ironic take on the different issues that are surrounding this idea of surveillance. So on one hand, we have invasion of privacy. On one hand, we have this big brother metaphor, right? So the big brother is watching you. You cannot go anywhere without the camera staring at you and figuring out, it's like, what are you doing? And on the other hand, you get things like the London bombing suspects, right? Who were essentially caught because they were on these security cameras. And there are all these very complicated civic arguments on the issue of surveillance. If we were to essentially present all these arguments in like pros here, cons here, right? It wouldn't necessarily have any personal resonance, but if you present it in this very humorous context where the camera looks at you and then is just like very insecure and it's like, oh my God, oh, look away, look away. So, and that's how we program this camera, right? Then all of a sudden there's like, whoa, this camera is maybe just as insecure as I am about this whole situation. It just doesn't feel like really good. It doesn't want to pry into my life. It can't make eye contact. It is irony, it is a joke, but it starts resonating in your head. You start thinking about all these issues of security and how and why we put cameras in places. Do we gain security by having this camera look at us all the time? I feel that some of the more successful artworks present a question rather than give a straightforward answer. I think you can raise some of the questions and allow the viewer to come up with his or her own decisions. And that sometimes is more powerful than actually stating a specific idea through an artwork. Relative Spheres #2 was a project that Woody Sullender, a sound artist living in New York, and myself have worked on. And essentially, the core of the project is a flock of 5 robots, and each one of the robots has this separate part of this 5-part track. And as they're moving around, they're changing the viewer's experience. So the viewers, as they walk into the room, they become aware of their position relative to the different robots that are moving around them. And essentially, kind of what we're trying to do is to make the viewers very intimately aware of how their position relative to an artwork changes their experience of the artwork. So the image that's behind me right now is part of the series called Surface Tension. What I was trying to tackle there was this notion of a landscape, a notion of a romantic landscape, and perhaps these set ideas of beauty that we have in our society, where we present these landscapes and there are these de facto views of the world and de facto views of beauty, and at the same time we have all this messiness, all this really wonderful things that happen with even like overlaps between different advertisements. So what I did is I grabbed some pages that had advertisements and then tiled them until what happened is I created these adscapes, and then I overlaid the traditional landscapes on top of the advertisement landscapes. So I collected all these advertisements, created a program that would put them all together, pack them, randomly space them on the canvas. What I also did here is used a program called TerraGen for generating backgrounds. So I took this commercial software, took the software that I wrote, put it together, and also the one thing that I wanted to play with is this idealized landscape and how we think that it reflects reality. But hey, here you have an off-the-shelf piece of software that actually generates these perfect pictures of reality for us. And then we have pieces of our reality, pieces that we live with every day, these advertisements that invade our visual plane, but somehow they're less real. You know, somehow they're this cyber realm, virtual realm of the computer. And kind of play with those notions and what is virtual, what is real, and put them together and have this digital landscape kind of come through the real landscape. And Jimi Hendrix used to go and see like this incredible amount of shows.
I think my biggest influence in some ways, I'll just talk about artists, is Vito Acconci. And he, a very early video artist from the 1970s.
So the show would be complete bust. The guy who would be playing the guitar would just be completely drunk, falling out of, you know, it's like falling off stage, and his strap would break, and bam, the guitar hits the floor. And then all of a sudden it just feeds back.
So when I still see his work, it just makes, I can see his pieces over and over again, and they still sort of mesmerize me.
And then bam, you know, he's got these incredible solos where he picks that space right, like on stage, right, and then that sweet spot where he can get all the feedback.
He performs for the camera, very simple, no props, very low tech, and just brilliant.
Grab that idea and then perhaps incorporate it into your own work.
And it's always a constant reminder that you don't need so much to tell something with real power. You just need a really powerful idea and a very interesting way of performing it.
Well, you know, seeing is believing, right? And the Center for Visualization is really aimed at giving us a new way of seeing, a new way of interpreting what we see, of thinking about what we see, and that's critically important. New ways of seeing have driven science in the past, and I think new ways of seeing will help us drive new science and new ways of thinking about our world.